Can play therapy help my child? That's the question we're asking today. I'm your host, Dr. Karen Wilson, and joining me today is Cathi Spooner. She is a licensed clinical social worker and a registered play therapist. Cathi has worked with children, adolescents, and their families since 1982 in a variety of capacities. Today, we're talking about play therapy, what it is, what it's not, and how it can help children process difficult emotions.
Millions of kids struggle with learning, processing, and social emotional difficulties. These challenges interfere with their ability to reach their full potential. Dr. Karen Wilson is here to help. Her extensive background in pediatric neuropsychology and higher education have prepared her for this unique mission. Listen as she delivers content to inform, educate, and empower parents and educators. This will enable you to identify challenges that kids face and get them on the road to achieving their full potential. This is Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus.
Hi, Cathi. How are you doing?
Good. It's good to see you again.
Good to see you again, too. Thanks so much for joining me today. It was so much fun being on your live stream and thrilled to have you here today because we've got a lot to talk about.
Yeah, I'm super excited.
We've been really intentional about discussing different treatment modalities on this podcast. We really want to provide parents, educators, and other stakeholders information about the way they can provide social and emotional support to their children and adolescents. And now you have enjoyed a long career of helping children and families since, very early stages. First as a special educator for children with emotional and learning challenges, and then as a mental health professional. So you've worked with children, adolescents, families who've struggled with anxiety, depression, trauma, attachment issues, dealing with divorce, separation, grief, loss, as well as self-regulation struggles, relationship issues. So you've covered a lot of difficulties that children face, adolescents face, families face. And that is why I wanted to have you on the podcast to talk about play therapy. Because again, we've talked about cognitive behavioral therapy. We've talked about dialectic behavior therapy, but a lot of parents ask about play therapy. What is it? How it helps? And I would love for us to kind of start this conversation by describing or defining what play therapy is, because it's more than just play.
Yes, that is such a good question. And one of my favorite things to talk about, really to help people understand what play therapy is and what it isn't. So play therapy is really about helping children access the therapeutic powers of play through a specific play therapy modality. And then that's kind of wrapped up in that therapeutic relationship with the counselor. And so I think the thing that's most important to understand is that play therapy is actually grounded in a theoretical model. Now, most professionals, as they get experience and they kind of grow in their professional journey, will use more of an integrated approach so that they can really individualize the play therapy to meet each child's needs. That being said, even though there's an integrated approach, they're still grounding it in a theoretical model and using the therapeutic powers of play. And so from a play therapy perspective, we look at children developmentally. And developmentally, children's cognitive and language capabilities are not the same as an adult. So what we say in the play therapy arena is that play is the language of children. We can use their play, grounded in a theoretical model, will kind of dictate how you help your child engage in those therapeutic powers of play. We can see what's going on in the session based on their play, their interactions with us, the themes that we're recognizing in the play therapy sessions over time, and how those change and evolve to get a sense of where children are in the change process. So it's more than just pulling out games and toys. It's about knowing how to use a theoretical model to help your client access the therapeutic powers of play, maybe through a game or through an activity.
Yes. And so what makes play therapy different from other treatment modalities? If you're explaining it to a parent where play therapy has been recommended, how would you explain that it's different than some other types of therapy? Obviously, there's a number of different ones. So,
yeah. What I usually say to parents is it looks a lot like we're just playing, and we are. And as a play therapist, I've been trained to know how to use that play to help children work through the issues that they need to work through. I mean, you watch, I remember years ago, this was back when I was in my bachelor's degree back in the 1980s. Part of because I was special education, and part of what we had to do is go into a preschool and observe. And I'm a young 20-something person. I might be like 20 at the time. And I don't have kids. I hadn't been around little kids. And I'm watching these little 4-year-olds interact in their play and work through different things. I was blown away by how they use play. And then later, when I was a special education teacher, we had this was again in the 80s, later 80s, and the school psychologist and social worker would come in, and we did play therapy groups, and just seeing how play can be used to help children work through whatever it is that's going on is a really powerful thing that makes play therapy different. And so what I explain to parents a lot of times is, you, like with little kids, you can kind of see what's going on with them by seeing what's going on in their play. They use play to work things out. Like I remember when my oldest was young, my kids are neurodiverse. Of course, at the time, this is back in like the early 90s, we didn't know as much as we do back then, now. But I remember my oldest child, and we didn't know he had ADHD back then, which explained a lot of things. But I remember he didn't talk much. He's still not a talker. He's a big introvert. And the only way I could figure out what was going on, one time I heard him in his bedroom and he was talking, and I remember thinking, who's he in there talking to? So, like any good mother, I hovered outside his door so he could see me, so I could hear what was going on. And he had his imaginary friend, and he was having this conversation with his imaginary friend. And as I was listening to it, I realized he was working through the day at preschool, working out all of the social interactions that had gone on, and he was using play to make sense of that. We see this even in the animal kingdom, like puppies use play. Animals, when they're babies, use play to figure out how to interact with each other. They figure out how to develop skills. They do all of that in their play, and humans are the same way. Children use that to try to figure things out.
yes. And there's so much research on the importance, this is kind of off topic, but the importance of unstructured play time, because it helps to develop those social emotional skills, those problem solving skills in real time.
I just saw some research on that like last week somewhere about, it was something exactly what you're saying. Like children are starting to lose some skills because they don't have that unstructured time as much as, like when I was young, it was all unstructured time. And now there's a lot more structure.
Yes, absolutely. So for parents who come into a therapist's office, they may see toys and games. And just like you're saying, therapy is so much more than simply pulling out toys, games, art supplies. But toys are important for providing a quality therapeutic space for children to, like what you're saying, process really difficult issues, right?
Yeah. And as a play therapist, we're very intentional about the toys that we have in the playroom. The toys that we have in the playroom are designed to have high therapeutic possibilities. So there are certain categories of toys that we'll have based on their ability to be used by children to work through things. Like we always have like nurturing toys, such as a kitchen and food, doctor's kits, veterinary. If that's like a bonus if you're a well-stocked playroom. Um, Baby dolls, nurturing things. We have some aggression toys where children can work through some of those aggressive drives. And aggression is not a bad thing. And like a lot of times parents will, and I usually have toy guns and handcuffs and swords, and I usually have a Nerf gun in there with Nerf darts. Parents get a little concerned about that. And children need to have a way to work that out. And we let them work it out and we normalize it. I mean, who doesn't get irritated? We all get irritated. To pretend that we don't have aggression is not healthy. We do. What we want to do is learn how to manage it, and how do we use that energy to help us in productive ways. So we want to have that ability to use that in the playroom for their therapeutic value. We have other like dress up so they can try out different roles. We have mastery things where they can try their skills and building and all different types of ways that children can use the toys to work through whatever it is they need to work through. So it's not just, any old toy will do.
I'm glad you brought up anger and aggression because, again, a lot of parents are afraid of those emotions, don't know how to respond to those emotions, but it's really about having to process those feelings from what I'm hearing from you.
Yeah, and children need a way to do that. I mean, there's so much that families get bombarded with all the time. Even now, it just seems that, the situation that just happened in Maine, we have the situation of the wars kind of breaking out, and it's all over the news, and we're just coming out of the pandemic and starting to work through that. So these are the real issues of life, and children do pick up on these things. Parents often don't recognize how much their child is actually picking up. They pick up more than we realize they do. And so in the playroom, they can work through some of those things that don't make sense to them, but they're picking up on all the emotions and things that are going on, the stressors, and being able to work that out in the playroom is where we want them to be able to do that.
Right. Many parents report having trouble helping their kids regulate some of those very strong emotions that we've been talking about. And you and I know that emotional regulation is an important part of healthy social emotional development. And it's really critical for forming healthy relationship and connections. Does play therapy help kids to better regulate their emotions? Does it help with emotion regulation issues?
Yeah, that's one of the things that we deal with a lot as play therapists, because kids who struggle with emotion regulation are, parents worry. They worry about their kids, and maybe they're doing well at school, but they lose it at home, or maybe they're not doing well at school and getting phone calls from the school. And that's one of the things. If you're a play therapist, the likelihood you have quite a few people on your caseload with emotion regulation is high. And then play therapy, again, it's going to be based on the theoretical model used. And play therapy, what we can do in the play therapy sessions is get an understanding of what's going on underneath the behavior. And the way that I look at that is I look at it from a neuroscience and attachment lens. From that theoretical lens, I'll use my play therapy model, and I'll look at it from a neuroscience and attachment lens. And what that helps me to understand is, I once heard somebody say at a conference years ago, the brain is the boss of the body. And I love that because it is in many ways, right? We have all of these physiological things going on, and they will influence behavior. So children are learning how to regulate strong emotions. That's a skill for them. That's something they have to learn. And sometimes, depending on what's going on, it might be more than they're kind of able to handle, and parents are not sure what to do with it. So what play therapy can do is we can get a sense of what is going on with the behavior, what's activating that behavior. And then depending on the model will dictate how we address it. One of the things that I also am a huge, huge advocate for among play therapists is really integrating parents in an intentional way in the play therapy process, not just emails, not just quick check-ins at the end, but meeting on a regular basis with parents, because parents need support, especially if your child is dysregulating. It's overwhelming and it's scary and they don't know what to do. And so as a play therapist, while I can be working with the child to understand what's going on and help them work through that in individual play therapy sessions, I can also be meeting with parents to help parents understand what's going on and help them understand that key concept of co-regulation. Children need parents to be able to co-regulate their strong emotions. And co-regulation means that as parent, I am kind of aware of what's going on in me and getting my internal state regulated so I can sit through the storm, not sit necessarily, but kind of be present in the storm with my child and use all of my kind of co-regulation skills that I'm learning with my play therapist, and use those to help my child eventually begin to get to a regulated state. And that needs to happen over and over and over for that neural circuitry to really develop, because children are, I always say, they're laying down that neural circuitry as they develop. So they need that external co-regulation from the grown-ups until they develop enough of those neural pathways and circuitries to eventually begin to self-regulate.
Right. And that's such an important piece, involving family members and being intentional about it, because I don't think any therapy with any child can happen without family involvement. And again, involving parents in a meaningful and intentional way is so important because it helps with the healing process for children. It helps kids to process the emotions that they are experiencing. And they do that within the context of the most important relationships in their lives.
I agree. And that's one of the things that I say all the time is we need to, as play therapists, as child and adolescent therapists, we need to view children in context. They don't exist alone, and they can't be the ones responsible for learning how to regulate their emotions. To expect an 8-year-old or a 5-year-old or even an 11-year-old who's struggling to to be able to get that done by themselves is a setup for failure for the child.
Do you ever incorporate other interventions like mindfulness into the work that you do?
Yeah, that's some of the skills that we teach. Like normally, if I'm working with a child who's 8 years old or younger, I'm using child-centered play therapy, which is the child leads the play and I follow and do what they do. If they're 8, depending on the age, but kids older than that, I'm usually using more of an integrated approach. And that might be something where teaching is how do you get in touch with your body? How do you recognize where the emotions are in your body? What do they feel like? To do that, you need to get into more of a mindful state. So teaching some deep breathing, teaching that, like sometimes I'll use a body scan meditation, and I have some activities that I do with them, and I'll do that. And then they have an activity that helps them recognize where they feel things in their body. And then we'll include parents. And we'll share with parents what's going on. The likelihood I'm going to invite parents into the playroom is extremely high. That might be something we do together with parents. And then coming up with some strategies that they can use at home and practice those at home. And then we kind of see how that goes. When I do it that way, I look at it as like teaching parents how to be skills coaches, so to speak. Like your child spends 45 minutes to an hour with me once a week. They spend all those other hours with their parents. So learning in the session is important. The key, though, is if parents need to help them use those skills in a way that's meaningful and helpful to the child, that's very key, to use those skills outside of the office in their everyday lives.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because the work you do has to generalize outside of the therapy room, which is the whole purpose of any therapeutic process.
Yeah. And I remember reading, this might even be like 15 years ago, probably. I remember I was doing some research because I was, at the time when I was living back on the East Coast, I was developing some social skills group, because what I noticed was there were a lot of kids who struggled, the neurodiverse kids struggled with social skills. And where I was at the time, there wasn't anything. And so I thought, well, I'll create something. So I went to the literature and saw, what was out there. And one of the things that struck me in my literature review to find out what made children's groups, play therapy groups, effective was that there was not good evidence for the effectiveness of groups for children unless the parents were involved, because the parents were the key for taking what the kids were learning in their social skills group and applying it in real time. And so from then, I figured out a way to make sure parents were involved. What that also struck me was, you know what? If we don't involve parents, even in the play therapy, then the being able to generalize the skills to where it matters is not really going to be as effective. And kids cannot be responsible for making sure that happens. The grown-ups have to be the ones creating an environment and providing the support where that can happen. And that's where I really feel like in the child and adolescent field, we really need to take responsibility to understand that and make sure that we're giving support to parents. Parenting is hard. I had 2 kids who were neurodiverse. It was really hard. I read parenting books those parenting books did not work for my kids. And then after a while, I just stopped reading them because they were annoying. And so, parents, we need support as parents. It's hard. We need somebody who's going to help us know how to help our kids. And you know what? Somebody just to be a listening ear. It is hard.
And I completely agree. There's so many parents, particularly when you have neurodiverse kids, you need to better understand what that means for your child because, it can present very differently in different kids in different households. And even within the same household, you can have two kids with the same diagnosis who behave and act very differently. And so having an understanding of what that is, what that means, and then also how to support your child, how to advocate for them with the school, with other family members who may not understand why your child prefers to stay in their room when, family members come to visit. And so there's so much support that parents need, guidance that they need to navigate, this journey of being a parent.
Oh, absolutely. Yep. I absolutely agree. And I think that's where in the child and adolescent profession, and play therapy in particular, I think that's where we need to make sure we're doing a better job with that to be able to provide that support. And I regularly say because I do a lot of training and consulting with child and adolescent therapists. And one of the things that I say all the time, and I try not to be annoying because I'm very passionate about it. I try to be supportive with it. But the main message is it can't just be a 5-minute check-in at the end of the session. One, it's never 5 minutes. And two, it's in front of the child. That's not always helpful. And doing the in-between emails or texts or phone calls, that's not as effective either. It's not the same as if you have a dedicated session at least once a month for 45 minutes to an hour with your therapist to get that support, to build that trust, because parents need to be able to trust you, one, that you're not judging them and thinking they're a horrible parent because they already feel like failures. They already feel like they've done something wrong and everybody is judging them, because if they have to come to counseling, in some ways it means they failed. The first thing we have to do is build that trust that, no, we're not judging. I'll often, because I'm fine self-disclosing, certain things, protecting my kids, they don't want all their stuff hanging out there. But as a parent, I get it. Even as a therapist, I've failed many times with my kids. So I get the parenting. I get parenting kids who are challenging. I did not get the easy one. And I always tell parents, I think that's God's way of saying, woman, you do not know it all. Do not be judging. No. And so parents are not going to really feel comfortable engaging and being the parent that they really want to be if they don't feel like they can trust the therapist. And therapists need time to build that trust. And the only way, in my opinion, to do that is to make sure to have those dedicated, intentional times on a regular and consistent basis, at least monthly. And it's important for parents to understand why why these are important, why it's better to do that than just the 5-minute check-in, why it's better to have that, even though it's hard because you've got 17,000 things you're doing. In order to get the most benefit out of the investment you're making with your time and money by taking your child to counseling, to get the best return on your investment, you really, both parents, if it's a 2-parent household, both parents need to be meeting with the play therapist. If it's a single parent household, parent needs to be meeting with the therapist. It's really important to get the outcomes that they want. And I think it's our job as play therapists to make sure we communicate that so parents understand how important it is. But we won't do that if we don't understand it ourselves.
Right. And that fits with what you were saying before about children develop in a context, and their context is the family environment, that family system. And so that family system has to be able to support the changes that are taking place as a result of therapy. They have to be able to respond appropriately to the needs of the child as they're uncovered during therapy, and to support that growth and that development and optimal well-being for that child.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think what you were saying also about understanding what's going on with children helps to make sense of it, first and foremost. Secondly, that helps you know what needs to happen.
Right. Now, when people think about play therapy, they often think of very young children. How old does a child have to be to benefit from play therapy? Because I'm hearing that it can also be effective for adolescents.
I've used play therapy interventions with adult clients. They have to trust me before they'll do that, though. So the ideal range for play therapy is like, I think it's 10 and under 8 and probably like 10 up to age 10. The reality is, though, we can help adults. I use play therapy and expressive arts. So when I use expressive arts like sand tray or art or music, some people are trained to use dance and movement and drama. Those modalities are expressive in nature. So what that means is there are other ways to verbally work through and make sense of, cognitively, like emotionally work through and make sense of things without having to verbally articulate and access those cognitive areas of our brain that they just can't get to because of the emotional content. They can't make sense of it. And even adolescents, developmentally, they're still learning how to do that. I have grown-ups that I've worked with, and I'll ask a simple question like, how are you feeling about that? And they can't answer because they never really stopped to consider, oh, wait a minute, how am I feeling? I don't even know how I feel. So grown-ups have a hard time with it. Cognitively, developmentally, they have the cognitive capacity to critically think that through. Children don't. Even adolescents are learning that. So I'll use expressive arts and play to access those therapeutic powers of play and activities to help adolescents process, make sense of, explore painful things, because it's hard to tolerate pain. I always look at it too. I always used to tell parents, I'm like Mary Poppins. Spoonful of sugar makes the medicine go down. And play is the sugar, so to speak. So having something enjoyable, we even know from neuroscience that when we're in distress, then it limits our ability to do that problem solving and to tolerate the distress. So if we can use ways to get at that are less intimidating, less threatening, less overwhelming, like art or music or sand tray or play, that makes it more accessible to figure out what's going on. I've had tons of adolescents where I've used art, like the reluctant ones that come in and sit on the chair with their hood over their head, their body language, arms crossed, and their facial expressions are like, whatever, I don't want to be here. And eventually, because I like to use humor, I'm kind of goofy and nerdy that way. So usually I can get them to loosen up, just being a goofball. But eventually we'll listen to their music that they like. I can get so much information that way. And we may use art, and I'll have them, do an art activity, and they don't tell me anything. They don't tell me anything in the music, but based on what I see and, what they do, it gives me so much information to know where I need to start to create that safety for them.
Cathi, this has been so informative. You've really helped us better understand how play therapy can be useful in helping young people process really difficult emotions, changes in their lives, trauma, self-regulation struggles, and the importance of incorporating parents in that process in a meaningful way. If our listeners want to reach out to learn more about play therapy, or if clinicians are thinking about incorporating play therapy into their practice, what is the best way for them to connect with you?
Yeah. So I predominantly, I don't do private practice anymore. So I don't work with kids or parents in my training business. I work predominantly with child and adolescent therapists who want to use play therapy and expressive arts. And so I have a Play Therapy Academy, which is group consultation and courses to teach them how to do that. I also have just courses. And if people are interested, if you're a child and adolescent therapist and you're interested in learning more about play therapy or being able to use it, you can go to my website, which is Renewing Hearts Play Therapy Training. And the website is rhplaytherapytraining.com. So they can go there and find out more. For parents, if parents are interested in finding out about how to find a qualified and trained play therapist, because people will say they're a play therapist, but they're not necessarily trained. There's a difference. Having been on both sides, I know the difference before I was trained and then after I was trained. One of the places that they can go is usually in each state. Each state will have a branch of the Association for Play Therapy. So they can look up Association for Play Therapy. So like in Florida Association for Play Therapy, Virginia Association for Play Therapy. And if you go to the website, they'll usually have information about how to find a play therapist in the state. So that's one way. And I would encourage parents to ask, like, what kind of play therapy do you use? What training have you had in play therapy? If the therapist gets a little put off by that, they might not, they may want to see how they feel about that, parents. But I feel like we should be able to answer that for parents, because if I'm a parent, I'm going to want to know.
Absolutely. Cathi, thank you so much for being here. We'll be sure to put links to that information in the show notes to help both the parents and the practitioners. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for listening. Be sure to check out the show notes to learn more about Cathi and her work. If you have a child who's been diagnosed with ADHD, dyslexia, or an anxiety disorder, and you want to learn more about how to support them, sign up for our self-paced mini courses at childnexus.com. It would be my absolute honor to provide some guidance. If you would like a one-on-one consultation with me to determine next steps in your journey, parenting a child who thinks and learns differently, reach out. My information is in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening. Enjoy your day.
Thanks for listening to Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus. For more resources, visit us online at childnexus.com.